Hello, everybody. Coming and participating in today's program. My name is LJ Stambrook. I'm the President and CEO of the World Affairs Council of Charlotte. And as you all know, our mission is to promote education about global affairs and local affairs that are important to our community. We're very fortunate today to have with us someone that doesn't need a lot of introduction, but I will introduce Dr. Quillen in just a moment. I do want to share with you that, as you know, again, that we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization, and that the opinions expressed in this program are not necessarily the opinions of the World Affairs Council. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan, and again, our mission is to promote education on global affairs and local issues of importance to our community. Please note that your microphone will be on mute and your camera turned off for the duration of this presentation. To submit a question at any time, and you will have an opportunity to submit questions, please use the Q&A box in the Zoom toolbar. You can see it on the screen in front of you. Please do not pose questions in the chat box because it's difficult to then have two sets of apps with questions. Use the question and apps box in the Zoom toolbar. This presentation will be recorded and we will send out to you via the WACC mailing list. So please do make sure you sign up to receive our emails so you can get the recording of this program. If you enjoyed today's free program, please do consider making a financial gift to help support our work. And the website is www.worldaffairscharlotte.org/giving. We usually have live events. This is not possible in this new normal in these circumstances. Therefore, it is very difficult for the World Affairs Council to generate revenues for its activities and programs. We depend on you, our members, for support. So please, if you can, if you're able, do support us. We would appreciate it very, very much. As I said, Dr. Carolyn Quillen. We don't need much of an introduction because we know Dr. Quillen. We know what she does and how well she does it. We are very fortunate people in Davidson, people in Charlotte, in this region, to have someone like her in our midst. You can all read her biography as you wish a little bit later, or you may already have read the details. But let me just say that under her guidance, Davidson is creating a new model for higher education in an increasingly interconnected world, which unfortunately the global pandemic confirms. We are interconnected and interdependent. The college's students cultivate deep skills and capacities such as critical thinking and problem solving. Combined with experiential learning at home and abroad, they are equipped to leave and have a strong impact in the world. I have to share with you that I took my son, my 17-year-old son Alexander, about 2 weeks ago to campus, to this beautiful campus at Davidson, to show him what a beautiful campus looks. And he was very impressed. And every time I go there, I say, what a wonderful place to have your higher education 4 years experience. So with no further ado, I turn it to you, Dr. Quillen. I do want to ask you one question before we start. Tell us about your day. How does your day look in this new normal? How is your family? How do you manage to work? If you can share that with us. Thank you.
Well, thank you, LJ, and thank you so much for the invitation. It's really such a great privilege to be here and to talk a little bit about higher education and innovation in these challenging circumstances in which we all find ourselves. And I'm pretty sure my day is very much like everyone else's day, where, you know, you kind of get up in the morning and get dressed from the waist up, sit down in front of a computer and, you know, talk on the phone all day, basically. And a few of my friends and I have been wondering why this is so much more exhausting than a normal day. I am incredibly lucky because I live on Davidson's campus and therefore am able to go outside and enjoy the beautiful North Carolina weather with ample space. My office is not too far away, so I can easily walk there if I need a change of scenery. But I know all of us are tired of this particular format. And with that format, I recognize that it's difficult just to watch me speak on a computer screen. So I'm going to try to speak fairly briefly and then invite your conversation and questions on anything that I speak about or other issues that you have in mind. But with deep thanks to LJ and everyone at the World Affairs Council Charlotte, I'd like to just begin by talking a little bit about innovation in higher education, especially now. And higher education right now is facing, we're operating in the midst of two significant crises. We have a global health pandemic, which, as LG said, demonstrates our interconnectedness and the ways in which what happens in one part of the world can very easily affect people in another part of the world. So higher education, like everyone else, is in the midst of this global pandemic, and that poses significant challenges to us, especially residential higher education, normally a face-to-face environment, high density situations. These are circumstances that are not desirable as we try to beat this pandemic together. So the global pandemic is a significant challenge for us. And then in the United States, we are in the midst of a societal reckoning as we once again see the killing of a Black American in a violent manner at the hands of the police. And so these two crises, the global pandemic and the killing of George Floyd, put higher education in a particularly, I would say, transitional moment, a moment where we have the opportunity to think about what we do and how we do it as we confront these two crises. Now, I mentioned that with respect to the global pandemic, our face-to-face community, our residential context, these are things that are particularly challenged by the coronavirus and COVID-19. With respect to thinking about our societal reckoning in the United States when it comes to racial justice, this is a movement that's largely driven by young people. These are the inhabitants of traditional higher educational campuses. Higher education has the obligation to analyze racism and to try to understand where it comes from and how we might dismantle it. And higher education institutions are implicated in the perpetuation of racial injustice in ways that we ourselves have not come to terms with. So it's a complex moment for higher education as we face these two significant challenges in the US, which has implications, I think, for how we think about global education. So what if we just step back? Right now, we're in the midst of it, right? We're all trying to figure out plans for the fall. How are we going to come back together? What can we as an institution do about racial injustice? And how can we be an agent for change and good? That's our urgent situation. But if we step back and we think about the context in which these two crises emerged, the context in which higher education was operating prior to COVID-19 and prior to this moment and this reckoning with racial justice in this country, what were we looking at? And the situation was already difficult. In the United States, we faced growing inequality, growing wealth and income disparities. The top 1% of wealth owners in this country own more than the bottom 80%. Income level of your parents is a strong indicator, a strong predictor of your socioeconomic status. And there are known disparities that our country has been struggling with in access to healthcare and education and housing and capital. So inequality was a challenge pre-COVID-19, and COVID-19 has exacerbated many of those disparities. So inequality, already a problem. Systemic racism in this country is a problem, and the murder of George Floyd graphically and tragically points that out. It's forced us in the United States to think about how seemingly race-neutral policies in many areas of life, law, finance, education, healthcare, how these seemingly race-neutral policies actually perpetuate racial inequities. So systemic racism is a problem that we were confronting pre-COVID-19 and pre the murder of George Floyd. And just as an example of that, I can use myself as an example of someone who's benefited in ways that would have been impossible had I not been white. My grandfather, who graduated from high school, he didn't go to college, graduated from high school, and in the 1920s, he started a Ford dealership, sold used cars, and repaired them. He could not have gotten the Ford franchise, nor could he have gotten the loan from the bank that made that business possible had he been a Black American. And those two things let him build a business that sent my dad to college and Harvard Law School, and me to college and my sister to college. So that story, that American dream story, was accessible to my family because we're white. And coming to terms with that inequity is something that I think all Americans are beginning to do. So inequality demonstrated most obviously in income, systemic racism, and then this country is really polarized, and it's polarized in such a way that makes education a political issue. So cosmopolitanism and globalization are suspect in this country right now. We've seen a rise in xenophobia, challenges to immigration, barriers to trade and personal mobility. The things that higher education thrives on have become suspect in this country and much, much harder to sustain. And education is seen as elitist and even out of reach for many Americans. And so this sort of, the polarization in this country has exacerbated a kind of anti-cosmopolitanism and xenophobia that becomes anti-education bias. So that's another problem higher ed was facing, in addition to inequality, systemic racism, polarization. And then there were specific, I'm really not trying to be depressing, so bear with me here for a minute. I promise this gets a little bit later and a little bit more optimistic as I move on. But I want to just set the stage for the challenges that higher education is now facing. So we have COVID, we have the reckoning with race that has been, for which the catalyst was the murder of George Floyd, coming at a time when higher ed already was confronting, growing inequality, systemic racism, polarization, and a kind of anti-education bias that goes with that. And then challenges that were specific to higher education that I don't think we've paid enough attention to in traditional college environments. And these will be very familiar to you. Cost. College costs too much, right? We at Davidson College charge more than most families in the United States make in a year. That is not a sustainable situation. And all the scholarship dollars in the world are not going to make that go away. So cost is a huge problem, growing concern about student debt. Relevance, are we teaching the right things? Are the skills that our students are learning valuable to employers? And how do we know? Are we giving students the experiences that they actually need to be successful and to lead a meaningful and satisfying life? So cost, relevance, equity. We in higher education believe that we are engines of social mobility. That's why most professors go into higher ed. We believe that what we do matters, that education is the path to a better life. Is that really true? Or is higher education simply replicating the status quo? Are we actually serving as an engine of economic and social mobility and opportunity for people? Or are we simply replicating the privileges that we all inherit? And then trust. We've had a really visible, really bad admissions scandal in higher education, which makes many people doubt the integrity of the process. Is the system rigged, right? Does my kid actually have a fair shot, or is the system rigged? So these challenges around cost, relevance, equity, trust, and then you add to that kind of the disruption that's potentially happening within higher education, mostly because of technology, right? So higher education faced specific challenges in the midst of all these societal challenges pre-pandemic around cost, relevance, equity, trust. And I'm just going to speak briefly, since my topic is innovation, speak briefly about tech and the ways in which technological advances claimed to be able to disrupt traditional higher education, that is to say residential higher education, what we know mostly as the 4-year bachelor's degree, but also any kind of residential model. So I remember when massive open online courses first came out, and the claim was suddenly opportunities that had only been available to people who could go to Harvard or MIT or Stanford were now going to be universally available and free. We could take these courses that you used to have to go to Cambridge to experience, or Oxford to experience, or Tsinghua to experience. And now we're going to be able to make those available to people all over the world at a very low cost. That was the claim of massive open online courses by organizations like Coursera and edX. Full disclosure, Davidson is a member of edX. So that was one claim about technological disruption. We can do it broadly, we can make it freely available, and why would people then go to Harvard if they can get Harvard courses without paying Harvard tuition? So this was one potential threat of disruption. Of course, the thing about this that we learned is that content delivery is not education. And the promise of MOOCs to make education universally available didn't actually happen, right? It turns out that the consumers of massive open online courses were mostly people who already had advanced degrees. So it wasn't a democratization, generally speaking, of education. It was mostly opportunities created for people who had already had a lot of opportunity and a lot of education. Now, that's not to say that we can't use technology to expand opportunity, but the initial idea behind MOOCs, that just didn't pan out, right? Other tech disruptions, in addition to massive open online courses, were things like micro-credentials. Can you offer people online options that don't require residency for 4 years, that speak to a specific credential? Can you disaggregate the 4-year degree into smaller pieces so that people can get what they actually need? I don't need to go to college for 4 years. I just want to learn how to code. Can I do that? So you see a lot of micro-credentials emerging as a result of technology. So before COVID, before the racial reckoning that we're experiencing right now in this country, higher ed was already facing these challenges around cost, relevance, equity, trust, and potential disruption coming from technology-driven startup companies. Let's just put it that way, right? So all of this kind of upheaval within the higher education community, particularly traditional residential college like Davidson. Davidson is a traditional residential college aimed at 18 to 22-year-olds. All of this caused a lot of reflection on our part and forced us to think about, what we could do. And let me point to some of the things that happened as a result of that. So there's a company called Minerva, which just said, all right, how can we take traditional higher ed, which is normally residential, and make it truly global? Minerva is a 4-year degree that is open to people all over the world. And over the course of those 4 years, the students live in 7 different global cities. It is the most internationally rich student body that I know of in that liberal arts context. So Minerva is another tech example that said, forget going to one place. We're going to take our students and they're going to live in 7 global cities over the course of 4 years, and they're going to be truly global citizens, right? So that's another potential challenge to residential higher education. But what all this turmoil and questioning and research and sort of soul searching said to me is that the things that we say about education in the United States, the things that we believe, are not actually true for most people. What we need to believe in the United States, what I needed to believe, what my grandfather believed when he started that car dealership, was that if you work hard and you stay in school, you can live a better life than your parents, and you can give your children a better life than the one you had. That is the promise of education, that education offers the opportunity for a kind of rich and rewarding life that would not be available otherwise, and that opportunity is important. It's not true. I'm not sure it's ever been true for more than a very select group of people, but right now, more and more people don't believe that. Michael Sorrell, who's the president of a place called Paul Quinn College, which I'll talk about in a minute, said this: if we go back and look at the history of higher education, it was founded to preserve the rights of the landed gentry and their ministry. It was founded to maintain and promote elitism, and that's what it has done. I think Michael overstates the case there, but I do think that, and I think after World War II in this country, education was a huge path to opportunity, and maybe even until the late 70s and early 80s. But at that time, higher education sort of became too expensive for most people to afford. The cost of attendance has risen dramatically. We as a society have shifted the burden of paying for higher education more and more to the student. We've seen education less as a public good and more as a private good for which the individual is responsible. And as a result of that, it's harder and harder for most people to believe that education is in fact a path to a better life, that education offers something worth having. And this means that we in higher, like it's actually our obligation to step back and say, wait a minute, what is it that our society needs us to do right now? What are we being asked to do right now in this country? And I would say what the post-secondary educational sector is being asked to do in this country is educate more people from very diverse backgrounds at all stages in life and career more effectively in less time at a lower cost. That is what we're being asked to do right now, right? So my question to myself and to my colleagues is, how are we going to do that? How is innovation within higher education going to help us do that both here at home and around the world? How are we going to do that? Educate more people from very diverse backgrounds globally at all stages in life and career more effectively in less time for less money. How are we going to do that? And we've learned some things from this COVID-19 experience, right? Traditional higher ed is very conservative. We have brilliant people who are creating amazing advances, a lot of them working on vaccines right now and treatments for this disease that we're all grappling with. Amazingly creative people who do innovative work every day in very traditional institutions, many of whose rituals are medieval, right? So we are very conservative institutions with very creative people. So we're not necessarily always good at adapting. COVID-19 proved to ourselves that we could adapt. Very traditional residential institutions went from being in person, face-to-face, as we always had been, to remote instruction in 5 minutes. We did that overnight. And that proves to me that we can adapt. We can adapt and we can think through how we're going to do things differently. Many institutions are continuing to adapt and proposing innovative models for the fall. Davidson has a design thinking process whereby we're imagining all kinds of scenarios so we can be ready for whatever environment we're working in. Beloit College jumped from a regular semester program to a 2x2 model. Their students will take 2 courses at a time so they can shift from remote to in-person more easily without losing a whole semester. Colleges and universities are adapting really well to the environment in which we find ourselves. We also learned from this COVID experience and also from some of the technologies and experiments in MOOCs that content delivery is not teaching, right? Content is content. You can get content from a book, you can get it from a recorded lecture. You're probably like bored out of your minds trying to get content from me right now. Content is content, right? That is not teaching. That is content delivery. What matters with teaching is whether or not students are learning. So instead of measuring the brilliance of a lecture or the coherence of an argument someone's giving up in front of a class, or whether or not a formula is really, really beautifully written on the blackboard, what we want to know is, are students learning? And that shifted our attention away from how smart we are and how brilliant we are at what we do as professors towards whether our students are actually able to learn from what we're doing. And that was a big shift in higher education. So we can adapt. We've shifted to a focus on learning rather than teaching. We recognize that pedagogy and content delivery are not the same thing, and that we need to be good at pedagogy no matter what content we're delivering. And we also recognize that, technology enables us to be global and to create global communities when we can't do that in person, right? So if we're not able to create our normal intellectual community in person at Davidson, we're going to need to figure out how to engage our international students remotely and build community that way. Intellectual communities that are created globally are strong communities, and you can unite global experts immediately and instantaneously using technology, and that is an advantage for education. So we've learned that even if we like being face-to-face, technology lets us build communities in really important ways for education. So the question then is like, how can innovation take us forward from this situation in which higher education was already facing very many challenges? Our society is facing very many challenges. We have the urgent situation caused by COVID-19, and now a calling for a kind of racial reckoning in the United States that's forcing us to think about many institutions. Where do we go from here? And my question again is, how do we, in the post-secondary educational sector, educate more people from very diverse backgrounds at all stages in life and career more effectively in less time at a lower cost? How do we do that? How do we do that in a way that serves them and serves our society? And I say serves our society in part because I believe that democratic societies require educated citizens, that they can't function effectively without educated citizens. And therefore it is an obligation on the part of education to help people become educated citizens. So let's step back and think about how higher ed might do this. And the first thing I would say is we need to think about the post-secondary educational sector as a whole, and not in terms of four-year colleges, two-year colleges, liberal arts colleges. Just think about post-secondary educational opportunity as a whole. And I would say that when we think about it in this way, differentiation is good. Differentiation serves the public, it gives people more choices, it creates more options, learners want different things, and for sure they don't all want a four-year residential experience. So we don't all have to be Harvard, but we have to support this differentiation. And that means traditional higher ed, people like me, can't see technology and innovation as a threat. We have to see it as part of a desire to serve all learners from all different backgrounds who have different desires and different needs at different times in their lives. We need to also, so one, differentiation is good. We need to think about how we use data to get better at what we do. And we've learned a lot about how students learn over the past few years. And that will help us, be more effective in reaching learners. So the shift from teaching to learning has made a big difference, right? Relevance really matters, and it's on us to help our students, our learners, understand why what we're doing is important to them. So differentiation is good. We need to look at data to get better at how we help learners learn. And then we need to look at what correlates with career success and later happiness. And we know what these things are, right? We know this from research. We know that students are later in life, graduates from college who look back on their college career point to three things that made the biggest difference and that they see as supporting or instrumental or furthering their happiness later in life. What are these three things? I had a mentor who encouraged my hopes and dreams. I did a long-term project that helped me connect what I was learning in class with what I wanted to do later, and I had an internship. Those three things as part of a college experience make a huge difference later in life. So we know that. So how do we structure post-secondary educational experiences so that we offer that to our students, right? We're always focused on technical skills plus human capacities. I had an amazing professor in college, and I always attributed until I thought through really why did he make such a difference to me? I can tell you less about what specific content I learned from his class than I can about how he taught, the ways in which he engaged me, the ways in which he asked questions, and the interest he took in me and what I wanted to do after college. And that mentorship was as important as the content of the class that he taught me. And since we know this to be true, we need to try to make sure that every young person has that kind of mentor in their lives. So we've learned these things: a more differentiated post-secondary educational sector that uses data to make decisions, that focuses on learning rather than teaching, and that takes advantage of what we know to be true. that would be a richer environment, right, for our students. What would this sector look like? What would this differentiated post-secondary educational sector look like? I'm going to just outline a few of the programs that will exist in this sector as we try to serve more and more students and more learners. We'll have more high school programs aimed at an impactful career, and the example I'll give is Year Up. Year Up is a program for high school graduates. It's a year long. It's guaranteed an internship, and the internship is usually a start to an entry-level job at what will be a great career path. Doesn't take 4 years to do it. Immediately available after high school. We have targeted programs, I'll call them Earn and Learn programs, where community colleges work with businesses to help students both learn what they need to know to do a particular job and also to graduate and get a credential. We have immersive experiences where you learn a specific skill in an environment that helps you retain that skill. Coding boot camps are a classic example of that. We have non-degree credentials that employers are increasingly valuing and these courses can be made available globally through technology. Coursera, edX are like this. We have online programs that are built to be online so that they're not simply taking an in-person lecture and recording it, but rather they're built to be online. So they take advantage of technology to help learners learn more quickly. We have an urban work college like Paul Quinn, which I mentioned, Michael Sorrell, who's the president there, which combines a 4-year degree with work, and students are guaranteed a job when they leave. So Paul Quinn serves our kids with coming up, the lowest income students, and sets them up not only for a first job, but for a career by structuring an education that combines work, which pays for the education, a 4-year degree, and very, very low debt, right? It's a great model that is new and innovative. Places like Davidson have to learn how to scale the liberal arts. We have to learn how to take what we do in 4 years, disaggregate it, and give it to people who want one piece of it. Our kids learn over their 4 years here how to navigate the unfamiliar. Often they learn that by studying abroad. How can we help more people have that experience? How can we help more people learn to navigate the unfamiliar, not be afraid of the unprecedented problems? If we just focus on that one talent, how do we deliver that to more people more effectively? There's also more calls for gap year experiences, national service year experiences that would help students connect what they're learning in class to a sense of civic engagement and civic involvement, right? Online programs can have global reach and can build global community at a time when we're all, I think, a little bit threatened by the ways in which cosmopolitanism and globalization have become a little bit suspect. There's a university called World Quant University, which offers master's degrees free of charge to students all over the world. It's funded by a foundation. It builds global community in a field where particular technical skills are important. It helps students get good jobs, and it creates this sense of global connectedness, which is so important in our interconnected world. So a new educational social contract, I'll call it, where we view education as a public good and where we in the post-secondary educational sector take responsibility for educating more people from different walks of life, different stages in life and career, more effectively in less time for less money. That's what I think the challenge is facing higher education, and that's where I think innovation of the sorts of programs that I've mentioned very quickly here can help us to get there. So with that, I'll stop talking, and I hope that you have a lot of questions either about what I talked about or anything that I didn't talk about. I may not know, but I'm happy to listen and learn from you. Thank you very much for your attention in this weird format. I wish I could see you.
Well, President Quillen, thank you very much. I'm Jane Zimmerman, Director of the Dean Rusk International Studies Program at Davidson College. And our many audience members have a lot of great questions for you, some of which you actually answered. But let me try to pick out some of the ones where they want to drill down or touch upon some other subjects you were only able to cover briefly. One is, how many students at Davidson are from abroad? And how do you see the COVID-19 pandemic affect next year's numbers of foreign students?
So at Davidson, between 9 and 10% of our students are international students, and they come from all over the place. And for students who are returning, that is to say students who already have a visa and have already been students at Davidson, if they're already in the United States right now, we don't anticipate any problem for them. For our incoming students who are traveling into the country from abroad, there's many hurdles to getting to Davidson. One is it's difficult right now to get an appointment to get a visa, and then it's hard to move. Mobility is limited both into this country and just the number of flights that are available. So we're working hard to make sure that those students, if they can't get here when we start in the fall, they are nonetheless able to participate in all of the activities that they would normally participate in. And then when they can get here, we can welcome them in person to our campus. So this is a challenge that many institutions are facing. How are we going to serve our international students at this time? And it's interesting because it's so important right now to build international community, and we benefit extraordinarily from having international students in our community for many reasons. And a significant number of Davidson students study abroad. So we normally have about 200 students studying internationally every fall semester, and almost none of them are going to be able to do that. And so this semester will be very different than a normal fall for us. So we're trying to also think about how we can accommodate those students. I have a number of students who were planning to go away over the summer, who are going to be seniors, and they feel like this was their last chance to spend their summer abroad, and we have some summer programs. And so trying to make sure everyone gets that experience is really important.
Great. We had a number of questions asking about admissions, and particularly about how admissions may change and how you might be able to evaluate the incoming classes given that the SAT and ACT have been dropped, and high schools all over the state and the country are implementing different teaching and grading policies as schools are closed for COVID. So there's quite a bit of interest about it. If you could just talk a little bit about how admissions may be affected.
Sure. So I can speak a little bit about Davidson and then about sort of the landscape generally. So at Davidson, we're very place focused, and it's important for us to be able to invite students who are thinking about Davidson to come to Davidson, to see the campus, and to experience the community. We have a number of ways for students to do that, and we have a number of programs where we bring students here through talent identification programs who might not have heard about Davidson or might not be able to afford to travel here. So it's a big change for us not to be able to bring students here. And we shifted to virtual town hall type things. And one thing that's interesting about town halls or virtual meetings is that you can sometimes get people to come to those that would have a harder time coming in person. And so we had like celebrity town halls with graduates who could talk to the students about their experiences at Davidson and what Davidson was like. But we do have a number of students enrolling at Davidson in the fall who've never been here, which is not the normal thing. In terms of admission standards, many institutions, including Davidson, we have a 3-year pilot now where we're not requiring the SAT or the ACT, the normal standardized tests that students take. And I don't know what the upshot of that will be. The SAT and the ACT have been under scrutiny for a while, in part because it's not clear how predictive they are of anything other than how you're going to do on the next standardized test. And they're a pretty good indicator of how much money your parents have. So it's not clear that they're useful in college admission, and I don't know whether schools will go back to them or not. That would put pressure on other aspects of admission. I will say that some institutions are beginning to question about, you know, what it is that we're doing when we're bragging about how selective we are. Why are we proud of how many people we say no to? You know, and that is a question. And there have been a lot of experiments. Like Georgia Tech has an online master's where everybody who meets the admission requirement can take this online master's degree. And why shouldn't we all strive for that as opposed to saying no to as many people as possible? So I think selectivity itself we might begin to think about why we're so proud of that.
That's a really great point. And in fact, it kind of ties into another question about, you know, evaluation and measuring. And Stefan Pinkney has asked, what systems and measures do you use to find out what students learn? So are we kind of thinking in new ways about how to evaluate education and learning as opposed to just the content delivery?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And I think in some sense, here's one way to think about it. Why would we ever ask a student, a smart student, a really gifted and talented student, like all of, you know, these amazing learners who come to us, why would we ever ask them to do something that had no value other than for me to give that kid a grade? Why don't we ask our students to do something useful for some other purpose? So now at Davidson, many more of our students are doing projects that are useful to the community. They're not taking tests that are just useful as a way of assigning a grade. So in history classes, we have students who are making documentaries about really important historical events and learning a lot about archival research and telling a story and constructing, you know, dealing with conflicting accounts of events, weaving those into a single narrative. They're learning a lot, and they're producing documentaries that are useful to other people, viewable by other people, can become educational material for other people. We have students in Spanish classes who are creating curricula instead of taking tests that can then be used in elementary Spanish classes. So one shift is you demonstrate what you've learned by doing something that is in and of itself proof of what you've learned, if that makes any sense. The other thing that we've tried to do is think through what our real goals are when we're teaching. So if I'm a historian and I'm teaching you about early modern Europe, is my goal really that you know, I don't know, when Martin Luther lived and died? Or is my goal that you know that you can analyze you can analyze a piece of writing and understand what its argument is and how it's different from another argument? So identifying exactly what it is that we're trying to teach and then finding ways of evaluating whether or not a student can do that by giving them opportunities to show us that they can do it. I think that's another way in which evaluation has changed. And popular teachers are not always effective teachers, right? And we're learning that more and more, that you can be wildly popular and wildly entertaining and tell great stories, and 5 years later, no one remembers anything that you said or really can't identify anything they learned from your class. So I think it's just it's taking the attention away from us. Like, it's not about us, it's about our students.
That's great. Another question here from Shri Radimal, which is, what does international diversity and inclusivity mean in terms of institutions, higher education, and hiring policy? And what distinctions might there be between, say, a private institution like Davidson versus some of the public universities?
So, I mean, I think colleges and universities have, to me, I think of them as residential intellectual communities. So insofar as we are intellectual communities, we know that the most intellectual communities that produce the most accurate knowledge are broadly diverse. They're diverse in every sense of the word. So the problem with homogeneous communities is that we all tend to ask the same questions, and therefore our scope of inquiry is narrowed. It's narrowed to what we know. Whereas if we build a broadly diverse community, we will ask better questions and produce more accurate knowledge. So I think public, private, any university or college is going to want to seek out that broad sense of the broad perspectives, broad life experiences in order to build a heterogeneous intellectual community that will ask better questions. It's becoming harder and harder and harder to hire international faculty, for example, because of the visa situation. And I think we in higher education need to push for regulations that acknowledge the importance of that heterogeneity in our communities for the sake of our students and our own learning, right? And so I think we have a profound obligation to hire broadly and to seek out amazing faculty from all over the world and to build a community that reflects this scope of the range of human experiences that we have.
Great. We have another good question here from Patricia Kapoor. If we should educate more efficiently and more quickly and at less cost, why do students need 3.5 months off in the summer? Summer jobs and internships are not so available these days with pandemic restrictions. So are we going to have to rethink summer in our post-COVID world?
Right. So I think there are a lot of institutions that are moving towards varying lengths of degrees and making better use of summer. This happened in K-12, and some K-12 schools made the same argument, right? That we don't need, the summer off is not the most effective way to educate students. So I think that's a fair question. I think what you'll see is more and more educational experience. The summer at places like Davidson, and let me be clear that, you know, Davidson, I'm very lucky to be in a community like this, and we have a lot of resources that not all institutions have, although we don't think we have enough, of course. but we try to make use of summer for students in ways that help them connect classroom learning to what they want to do afterwards. So I would say there is a value in having some space in an educational experience where you can connect what you're learning in a class with something that happens in the world. It doesn't necessarily have to be over the summer, but that is a valuable thing. And so right now we're developing a lot of remote internships and remote experiences for students because it is difficult for them to do what they would normally do, either work or travel or get an in-person internship. But we've been trying to imagine how we might do some of that remotely. I agree that the 4-year degree that will become increasingly disaggregated when that serves the needs of learners. There's no reason why it has to be 4 years or nothing. And employers are not going to care so much about that BA degree as long as you can do what they need you to do. And many people want a shorter learning experience. So I do think that questioning the need for 4 years in a residential setting is going to be important. And in this differentiated landscape that I tried to describe, there were lots of opportunities for focused, targeted learning and credential acquisition.
Well, it also kind of leads into a great question from Valerie Hatcher, who wanted to know, how do you envision traditional face-to-face classes looking if and when we're able to have classes on campus again?
So I'll speak a little bit about post-COVID planning, or not mid-COVID planning for Davidson. We very much value our ability to be together, and what we learned over the course of the spring when we went remote was that the context, our residential community, and the connections that we have with one another, our sense of connection to one another and the community that we build here, transforms the environment in which we learn. So when we were remote, we were trying to construct community in that way that would enable that environment, that holding environment, to support the learning that takes place on campus. So we very much want to come back together. And so we are doing all kinds of things on campus to make that possible, everything from reconfiguring classrooms to dividing classes to planning, we hope, for some outdoor spaces for teaching and eating, to community standards about personal behavior. So I imagine that it will be very different, but my hope is that we'll be on campus. And some faculty members will be remote, even if the students aren't, given the nature of this disease. So.
Right, and that kind of leads to, we have time for, I believe, one more question, and it kind of segues nicely, which is, what is your sense about students coming back in the fall? I mean, how many of your students have requested deferrals? How is Davidson handling these requests? And also the initiative, I think Davidson was pretty much the first one to step forward with a creative option or in terms of how to pay for the upcoming academic year.
Yeah. So Davidson we have a need blind admission, and we meet financial need, and we do it without loans in the packages. Financial aid is usually determined based on tax data, and tax data isn't helpful right now in COVID-19 because a lot of people's financial situations change pretty quickly. We have, millions and millions and millions of people unemployed. We have lots of small businesses that are, under threat. So we created a tuition deferral plan, which would enable folks to defer the payment of the fall tuition payment for up to a year, if that would help them through this time. And we give financial aid based on needs. So we try to make it possible for all students to come to Davidson all the time. And we've made taken some additional steps around COVID-19. We've also made adjustments to how we, to sort of summer earnings expectations that we have for students, recognizing, as the previous question did, that many students are not going to be able to work this summer. With respect to deferrals, we've had I would say a couple more, not a lot more, but it's the questions usually, I want to be there, and if I can't be there, then I'd like to defer to the spring or to next fall. Mostly, we're concerned about our students who had planned to travel internationally, about how we're going to make sure that they get that experience, if that becomes possible, again, without interrupting their educational experience. Did I answer that question? I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, and actually we have time. Actually, it turns out, for a couple more questions, if you don't mind. You've been doing a great job, by the way, of teaching as opposed to just delivering content. So
it's hard to talk to yourself in the computer, like I'm seeing myself and I'm talking to myself.
Well, you've engaged a lot of wonderful members of our community. I think some are interested in kind of probing a little bit deeper into what are some of the things that Davidson College and other higher education institutions can do to ensure that students are competitive in a global workforce.
Right.
And to think about this as kind of a part of our new normal, and the kind of skill sets that maybe you foresee, because I think you've got a lot of forward-looking vision here, but the kind of skill sets that are really going to be important for developing critical thinkers, lifelong learners, and competent global citizens, where they're not just going to be competing for jobs in the US or their home country, but literally all over the world.
Yeah. So when we think about changes in the employment market and the situation, it's such a different situation than even I faced, really, or certainly than my dad or my grandfather faced when they, let alone my mom, when she graduated from college. So I think this is a very different environment. And this is, again, the focus on us identifying what it is we're trying to help students, let me put it this way, what skills we're trying to help students develop, and what human capacities we're trying to give them the opportunity to exercise. So when we talk to employers about what they value about our students, it's things like they're disciplined, they don't give up, they know how to reframe a question when that question isn't productive. They can take data from disparate sources and disparate places and synthesize it into a single argument. They can communicate broadly to different audiences and be effective at doing that. So the first step is to figure out what talents and capacities are helpful in building a career. And then for us, it's looking at our curriculum and figuring out how we do that. Like, what is it about a Davidson experience that lets students do that? And I think those are the skills that help our graduates compete in an increasingly global economy. They're also talents and capacities that are useful in life, right? So we also want to make sure that our graduates have the talents and capacities to be effective global citizens. Do they exhibit empathy? Can they listen? Do they understand arguments that are other than the ones that they would make? Can they disagree in a way that's productive? Do they understand inquiry as something that, or conversation as something that can be collaborative inquiry and not just debate? And so we are figuring out which experiences our students have here that help them develop those talents and capacities. And then at Davidson, we're trying to figure out how we could offer those to a much broader audience than just the 2,000 degree-seeking students that we ourselves serve.
Well, the World Affairs Council of Charlotte is giving us a great opportunity to do that now. And it segues into a final question that I think is really important as well. As we know, free speech has been a very hot issue on college campuses and within our own society. So what are your thoughts about free speech and the values of our society, and is free speech under threat in campuses? But what does that also mean in this new post-COVID context as we're looking more at being global citizens, especially when we have students and colleagues who may come from countries where free speech doesn't even exist, much less, it's not even debatable.
Yeah. So it's an interesting question. So I would say that with respect to colleges and universities and places that are educational institutions, this notion of freedom of inquiry is foundational. And what I mean by that is that you have the opportunity and the right, honestly, to pursue any line of inquiry that you think worthwhile, and that no one can tell you that you can't do that. So for example, you want to study some new potential, treatment for a disease, and everyone else tells you that you're crazy, but you have the right to pursue that line of research. And so I think that's what's crucial in higher education. Freedom of speech is a constitutional right in the United States that is designed to protect, to ensure the sort of free exchange of ideas. What I tell my student, I don't think free inquiry is under threat on college campuses, and I don't think freedom of speech in the way that it is intended constitutionally is under threat on college campuses. I think college campuses are increasingly saying we are a place where we want everybody to be able to speak freely, everybody be able to participate in inquiry, and that might mean that we have certain guidelines for how we engage with one another. So an epithet is not an argument. An epithet may be constitutionally protected by free speech. Hate speech is constitutionally protected, but that doesn't mean in our communities of inquiry, we can also see how epithets could prevent someone from pursuing a line of inquiry that they want to pursue. So I think it's colleges and universities want to set up an environment where freedom of inquiry flourishes. And sometimes that means that we agree on guidelines of how we are going to engage with one another in order to promote that freedom of inquiry, if that makes any sense. So I don't think freedom of speech is under threat on college campuses. I've written elsewhere about the relationship, about why I think students are protesting certain speakers, and I won't get into that now. At Davidson, our students have the right to invite anyone they want to speak, and the responsibility to invite people that are worth hearing, and that's written in the Davidson College Constitution, and it's up to them to figure that out. So.
Well, great. We've had some really extraordinary speakers, particularly this past year, but Davidson, especially through the Reynolds Lecture and other platforms, has really had an extraordinary speaker program. And with that, let me see if I need to turn it back to LJ, because I see him here on the screen. But before I finish up, I just want to say thank you to both the World Affairs Council of Charlotte, President Quillen as well, and let me give the final word to LJ.
Thank you so very much, and you did a great job. President Quillen, it was a true pleasure to hear you share your thoughts on the impact of COVID-19 on higher education and learning, the future of global education, and on civic engagement. It was very edifying for sure. And I just enjoyed so much hearing how you create the experience for your students to make them global citizens. It is a must, and you excel at that. So that is really wonderful. Thank you all our members for participating today in this program. I would like to give a special shout out to our board members who are here as well, and to all the people from other councils and from across the country that are participating in this program. Let me remind you one more time, this program is recorded. So if you want to share this very interesting expose of what's happening in the higher education, what we can expect, and also in our community, in the future, please let us know your email address if you're not fully registered with us, and we will make sure you get this recording. You see a slide, again, I have to repeat myself, but we are in very difficult times, and if you are able to support us, we would very much appreciate it. If you're not a World Affairs Council member, please become one, and if you are, if you can support us a little bit, we would appreciate that one more time. Dr. Quillen, as I said, a true pleasure. We would love to have you come and speak to a live audience. I know you enjoyed it very much. We talked about it in the session before this program. We look forward to that happening, hopefully sooner than later. Thank you for all you're doing, and it was a great privilege for us to have you speak to us today. Thank you all, and we are adjourned. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.